Senator Sheldon Whitehouse is demanding accountability. And when he doesn't get the answers that he wants, he figures out workarounds to be able to get them. For example, serving FOIA requests now in the Department of Justice alongside Senators Blumenthal and Schiff, because the DOJ is just stonewalling turning over information to Congress, information that it should have turned over already. I had the chance to sit down with Senator Whitehouse, who you all know is one of the greatest fighters for the American public in D.C. right now. And I asked him, what can we do to capitalize on the insanity that is this Trump regime? And he said 3 C's. Cost. Tie everything to how much it's costing Americans to have what? Corruption. The corruption that is defining this administration and Trump. And lastly, he said chaos. All of the chaos that is, being a part of American life right now that is being caused by whom? By Trump. Those are the 3 C's: cost, corruption, and chaos. And you know what? It makes sense. Take a listen to more of the insight that we got from Senator Whitehouse. Joining me now is Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, who before we hit the record button, said is probably one of the busiest men in D.C., and I will stand by that assertion. Senator, thank you so much for taking the time to join me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. This is great.
Well, look, Senator, I'm going to straight out of the gate start with something that I thought was so critically important. I want to make sure people understand that you are doing the work. You, Senators Blumenthal and Schiff, just submitted a batch of FOIA requests to the DOJ last week, seeking records that have been stonewalled in terms of production. And I kind of want to explore just a few of those topics with you, because I do think that they speak to the transparency that the American people deserve and that they need to get. They run the gamut from getting more information concerning Emil Bovey.
Yep.
I'm a big fan of calling all of those lawyers the enablers. I call them law lackeys. Emil Bovey as one example, specifically concerning the stonewalling of production of documents vis-a-vis his Senate confirmation hearing for Bovey before he ended up on the Third Circuit. The suspicious activity reports, the SARS for Jeffrey Epstein, concerning anti-money laundering suspicious activity reports, Ghislaine Maxwell's transfer to the country club that she's now at, federal prison camp Bryan. In addition, something I think that's gone by the wayside because, frankly, there's just been so much chaos, but that $50,000 kava bag to Tom Homan, as well as, Kash Patel, the Qatari plane. I mean, I could go on and on. There's 12 areas that you submitted FOIAs for. I mean, Senator, we're at the point where you guys have to submit FOIAs to get information?
Isn't that amazing? The experience that really drives me is when I was trying to look into the Kavanaugh investigation, the fake Kavanaugh investigation that was done under Christopher Wray. Yeah, the investigation which no investigating was done. We were being stonewalled for stuff that we actually were able to find in the public domain, for like FBI documents on how a background check is ordinarily run, stuff that there's no reason whatsoever not to disclose. And we were getting none of that. And at the same time, across the aisle in the Judiciary Committee, the FBI was just sending truckloads of material up to the Republicans to help them attack the Crossfire Hurricane investigation and play to Donald Trump's Russia hoax. And so, I know what it's like to be jammed in traffic with the bar down in front of me while the superhighway of information goes by to the Republicans from the very same source. So it's very, very frustrating. And it truly is the case that we have now reverted to, as a matter of custom, filing FOIA requests, which any citizen can file, because it is easier to do that than it is to get oversight cooperation out of the Trump executive branch.
And for folks tuning in, FOIA is the Freedom of Information Act. And to the senator's well-taken point, any person can do it. And there are timelines that have to be followed. And if they are not complied with, litigation can ensue and fees and costs can be done.
Yeah.
But It's just kind of outrageous because, just as just common sense would dictate, it throws up a lot of red flags when you don't turn stuff over. If you think you're doing everything legally and everything's kosher, why not just show your hands to be able to do it? And yet all of the stonewalling is, as we say, especially in the legal sense, it's consciousness of guilt. It shows that that there's something totally untoward, very bad going on, and you don't want the world to know. And what frustrates me is a lot of the stonewalling. I mean, and look, your FOIAs went to the Department of Justice.
Yeah.
If there was ever a federal agency that should stand by transparency, it would be our DOJ. And yet I call her Pamela Joe. Pamela Joe has one client, and it is not the people of the United States of America. It's Donald Trump.
Yeah. The theory of congressional oversight is that the Department of Justice is actually going to be sort of the impartial monitor between Congress and the executive agencies, so that they're telling the executive agencies, you need to produce this stuff unless you can tell us a pretty good reason why you can't. And they're the intermediary. Now, they've completely blown that role, so we're going to have to redo that. But the fact that not only are they now not an honest intermediary, but they're actually the full-blown complete impediment is pretty remarkable. I think, Katie, this is actually kind of an aspect of the Trump cosplay approach to government. It's not quite the equivalent of, Kash Patel playing around in his FBI jackets, or Noam having to dress up for, umpteen different roles and little costumes. But a pugilistic, combative, angry going in, lie with whenever you can stance is kind of the mark of this administration. And so the expectations have been completely reset as to our ability to get any kind of a reasonable response from these folks. I don't think that can last very long, but that is where we are right now.
Well, I would say the following. In some ways, perhaps it does inspire and serves as the genesis to get the Democrats controlling the gavel again, right?
Yeah.
To be in positions of power so that we have accountability hearings and we have the transparency that y'all are trying to get through these FOIAs. But, before we talk about Kash Patel, because we got to talk about him, though, I did want to ask you then, because you mentioned Brett Kavanaugh, and you mentioned Pamela Joe, Emil Bovee. I mean, I could go on and on, Kash Patel. I mean, I've always had this internal debate about the utility of these Senate confirmation hearings. And no offense, right? I mean, I know it has to happen.
No, I totally agree with you.
But it's like it's become total kabuki political theater, right? I mean, it's just, I've watched you and Adam Schiff and others really take the laboring oar to make substantive points. I've seen the grandstanding, the stonewalling, the bullshit answers that are coming from the witnesses and the deponents. And yet, in the end, if the numbers match, and they sail through or they get through by the skin of their teeth. I mean, it's an incredibly frustrating thing to watch democracy in action, because that's really what it is, right? But then to end up with an RFK Jr., a Pamela Joe, an Emil Bovee, a Kash Patel, a Christine, Pete Hegseth. I mean, these are people that have zero fitness, either morally, competence-wise, to be able to serve in these jobs, and yet they are, because they get Senate confirmed.
Yeah, well, part of what's to blame here is the spines of foam of Republican senators who know better than to confirm these creatures.
True.
And yet they're terrified of Trump, and they do. I mean, look at what Joni Ernst was put through when she looked like she might not be voting to confirm Pete Hegseth. That was a really violent political response. It was pure, political terrorizing. And that that's kind of new in our world. That's why Lisa Murkowski spoke out about the environment of threats and intimidation that Republicans experience. But the Bovee thing, that was probably the worst of all, because the chairman of the Judiciary Committee led with an invitation to Bovee to not answer questions based on privileges, which Bovee never actually asserted. He just said, well, I'm not going to answer. Actually, if you want to claim a privilege, there's a routine you have to go through to assert it. And he didn't feel he even had to do that. Worse, these were privileges that the chairman himself had previously said don't apply to Congress, don't apply in nominations hearings. So the guy basically got given a green light by the chairman to refuse to answer our questions. And this all happened in the context of him being the subject of a contempt proceeding while he was going through his judiciary confirmation, and two Trump judges stalling that contempt hearing for an amazing 4 months, using a tool that's usually only good for days. 4 months, which was just the amount of time needed to get Bovee through without us having an honest look at whether or not he committed contempt of court against the administration.
Well, then it also, you had a whistleblower, an exceptionally credible whistleblower in Erez Ravaney, who stepped forward to provide credible evidence, testimony, otherwise.
Credible and corroborated.
And for that to still end up having Emil Bovee sitting in a lifetime appointment of the Federal Appeals Court is shocking. I did want to quickly ask you then, as a footnote, your thoughts about somebody like Judge James Boasberg, who did get a little bit of leave to be able to pursue the contempt proceedings.
Yeah, and he is.
And he's doing it.
Yep.
And thank gosh for him. And then, this idea, then we're finally also having, interestingly, from the Third Circuit, Emil Bovee's land, appellate affirmation that Lindsey Halligan and people like Alina Habba, more specifically Alina Habba, were invalidly appointed. The Trump administration trying to end run laws and rules to get their lackeys and their loyalists installed as U.S. attorneys. And all of these judges on the district court level and even appeals court judges now saying it doesn't work, it doesn't fly.
Yeah, I don't think there's ever been so much losing done in court in the history of the United States as by the Trump administration. And on top of the losing, which is already pretty remarkable, is the overlay of criticism that judges appointed by Trump, Obama, Bush, Biden, Reagan, you name it. It's across the board. The criticism that they heap on the performance of the Trump lawyers, on the honesty of the Trump lawyers, using words like contempt, like pretextual, like dishonest, like not consistent with the facts, things that in a regular Department of Justice would set off alarms and an internal response to get to the bottom of what went wrong. But again, in this cosplay MAGA DOJ, being all like bumptious and angry and even incompetent is all part of the act. So, the judges have actually done a pretty good job at pushing back at a good deal of that. Of course, once you get up to the Supreme Court and the shadow docket, which is kind of the Jiffy Lube of the Supreme Court, then they do very well because the court doesn't have to explain itself. It can just hand wins out to the Trump, temporary wins, but usually determinative ones.
I've been saying the presumption of regularity has become the presumption of irregularity with the Trump administration. I am going to ask you about what's going on with the Senate in terms of a possible healthcare vote next week, as allegedly promised to happen. But, affordability is clearly something that's top of mind for all Americans, regardless of party affiliation. I am still waiting for my prices to go down. I am waiting for the Ukraine war to be ended. And I am waiting for the Epstein files to be released, all of which was promised by Donald Trump during his campaign to become president of the United States again. But somebody who has no problem wasting money is Kash Patel. Obviously, his nickname being Cash. I think he's taking it literally now. But that is most certainly an example of the level of just insanity that is happening at the FBI. This $60 million private jet trips literally to Boondoggle Ranch.
Can you believe that? I mean, if you wrote that in a dark comedy, people would say, okay, now you're just being too snarky.
Now you're just making it up.
That's actually true. He flew the FBI jet to Boondoggle Ranch.
refusing to get off of this private jet or step out unless he's wearing an FBI flak jacket, and it's got to have, certain labels on it, and then he had to borrow it from a female agent. And I'm just throwing that part in there because, that he definitely doesn't like people knowing about that. I mean, Senator, this is where you're finding, though, that we have to spend resources of our federal government wasted by people like Kash Patel, greenlit because, grift is the name of the game.
Yep.
But we're having to now investigate these things because people are now going to have to decide if they put food on the table or they have health insurance. And yet Kash Patel didn't go on date night with his girlfriend in Nashville on a private jet.
Yeah. Well, the healthcare problem is really serious for the Republicans right now. We are very clear, and we've been very clear that we want the Affordable Care Credits extended. Yep. And we've even offered to extend it for a year. Not too long, plenty of time to debate things, but at least extend it for a year and get Americans out of peril. And that's the way they want. Well, we threw in a reform commission to look at potential bipartisan reforms. It was kind of a really good offer for them, and they couldn't take it. Over on the Republican side, I think a dozen Republicans in the House have said, we would like a 2-year extension. But they won't take a 2-year extension now, even though enough of their members to get through a discharge petition have said so. So we've just made a simple, clean offer, 3 years, extend it, simple, done. We can do other stuff in the meantime, but at least take this immediate fiscal peril off of family kitchen tables. And their problem is that they've got nothing, and they can't get anything sensible out of Trump, and they can't get anything sensible out of RFK Jr., and they can't get agreement within their caucus, and the House and the Senate are fighting. So it's the gong show over on their side, and the sheer incompetence and the lack of any policy capability whatsoever is going to come home to roost on them. And our hope is that at the end of the day, they panic at the last minute and say, okay, we got nothing. And we're going to get clobbered as Americans face 100%, 150% cost increases. So what the hell, we'll throw in the towel. But they're also so stubborn, and Trump is so sort of mulishly incompetent that there's a very good chance that they just walk themselves right off the cliff. And then we have a lot to talk about between now and next November.
Well, I also have this fear that having rolled everything pretty much over into January, we're going to be dealing this battle again, right? We're going to be having to deal with budgetary issues again in January. But that is on top of all of the negative consequences of what I call the big bullshit bill, right?
Yeah.
That got passed this year in July, which impacted SNAP and insurance premiums, et cetera, already. I mean, we're just kicking the can down the road with these CRs and stuff. And, my fear is, the Republicans are never going to act in the best interests of constituents. And so we end up with millions of Americans that have tripled premiums if they even get coverage at all. Your thoughts about whether this vote's actually going to happen, though? I mean, you really think this?
Yeah, no, I think it's going to happen. I think they're going to have really no choice but to do it. I think the representations that were made to the Democrats who voted for the CR are sufficiently strong that they'll have a real problem looking them in the eye and breaking that promise in plain view in front of everyone. So I suspect it's going to happen. But as you point out, that just gets us onto the next big deadline, which is January.
Exactly.
And the theory was that they'd have that much time so that the Appropriations Committee could come in and put their subcommittee appropriations bills forward and get them voted out. And we did some of the smallest ones, some of the least consequential ones, but we haven't done any of the major ones yet. And that has now turned into a bit of a snarl. I hope that snarl gets unsnarled. But back to the earlier point about Republicans in complete disarray.
Yeah.
The appropriators on the Republican side actually like appropriating. It's an important committee to be on. You get to make big decisions about funding, but you give that all away if you can't pass appropriations bills. And so you then get this additional tension within the already disgruntled Republican ranks of the appropriators who've had their power as appropriators stripped because their most extreme MAGA loon colleagues don't want to allow appropriations bills to go forward. So it just adds to the heat, to the discord, to the dysfunction that voters are more and more looking at with real disapproval.
Well, part of the, let me, distract you moment is the potential for a land war in Venezuela, which is just galling to me. The audacity of this administration, which has been pretty audacious so far, the audacity of trying to engage our American military in something in Venezuela under a bullshit excuse of narco trafficking when at the same time and in the same breath, you'll pardon Juan Orlando Hernandez, the former president of Honduras, who was convicted here in the United States, sentenced to 45 years for using his country to help importation of cocaine, which has killed countless Americans, but will still extrajudicially kill people in the water, and heck, we'll park huge carriers off the coast of Venezuela, and heck, maybe we'll invade Venezuela because we don't want you to have health care. I don't want to turn over the Epstein files, and to hell with any other affordability, because that's just a Democratic hoax.
The problem with that for the Republicans is that for Americans who are in this true cost of living pain and about to see it, for many of them, get way worse because of health insurance, homeowners insurance, things like that, they are not going to be distracted by Venezuela. You and I will be furious about an illegal attack on a foreign sovereign based on a false premise, but regular voters aren't. They're still going to be angry as hell that Trump is not paying attention to their immediate needs. Plus, the MAGA coalition fractures over this because half of them are America firsters who don't want us involved in overseas wars. And that was kind of Trump's promise. No more wars.
No more endless
wars.
That's right.
So I think, he's making it worse, not better, for Republicans next November by pursuing this mad Venezuela strategy, if you could even call it a strategy. Gambit, I guess, would be the better word.
Well, it's the concept of a plan. So he's the concept of a strategy. Venezuela, as he's wont to do. Senator, I kind of have a little bit of a high level question for you, which is, and I don't want to sound too Machiavellian, but I'll be honest, I can be fairly Machiavellian sometimes when it comes to these things. How do we as Democrats capitalize on this chaos, though? Because the Republicans are truly on the backs of their heels, right? Yep. They're on their heels. They, in many ways, when it comes to the economy, when it comes to even just having a moral compass, when it comes to human rights, immigration still going on, the draconian immigration enforcement still going on, people disappearing off our streets. I'm still waiting for proof of, Tren de Aragua for Invocation of Alien Enemies Act. I mean, that was also this year, too, in 2025. It sounds like it wasn't. I mean, how do we as Democrats capitalize on this chaos?
I think we got to have relentless focus and keep it simple, stupid clarity. And I think the avenues for that are first to talk all the time about people's costs. And where you can, which is in actually most of these areas, link the cost problem that American families are facing with corruption, with Trump corruption. That people's costs are going up in order to allow Trump to corruptly help his billionaire buddies. And the third is chaos. We can put things into the cost, corruption, and chaos buckets. And I think the cost and corruption pairing is particularly strong. And there are things we can do like electric bills, people's electric utility bills are going up and are going to go up way more. It's actually quite easy to get people to understand that when Trump tries to ban clean energy and try to pull it off the grid, that doesn't make demand go away. People still are running their air conditioners and their toasters. That means that you've got to replace that with something else. And the something else that you replace that with is fossil fuel plants that are more expensive, demonstrably more expensive. You just look at the generation stack and you can see that these fossil fuel plants are more expensive to run. And so it's pretty easy for people to understand that when he attacks clean energy, when he tries to ban clean energy, that has the direct effect of taking money out of consumers' pockets, right out of their pocketbooks, and transfer it directly to the fossil fuel big donor owners of those expensive polluting power plants that wouldn't be running otherwise, where they wouldn't be getting paid otherwise. And now they're running and they're driving up costs for everybody because they're the most expensive things on the grid. And that's not too complicated a story to tell. I think I just told it in about 40 seconds. And when people look at their electric utility bill and learn, oh my God, that's not just my utility doing that to me. That's Trump. He did that on purpose. He tried to ban clean, cheap energy, and now look what I have to pay. That's the kind of thing that sticks. It's bad enough when your costs are going up. It's worse when you understand that your costs are going up because this president is trying to cheat you for his billionaire buddies.
It's the billionaire buddies bromance. It's the fossil fuel friends. It's drill, baby, drill. Even his Bureau of Land Management nominee is somebody who's most certainly somebody who's embraced it. I mean, look, you talk like a trial lawyer. You got a theme. It sticks. And all kidding aside, it works though, because I do think that people know that it's all interrelated. I've been riding this horse to death. Everything is interconnected these days, inextricably intertwined. Every single issue that faces an American is inextricably intertwined. They cannot be siloed. And it's the common denominator, though, for all of the negative, the hurt and the pain is a man by the name of Donald Trump. Yeah. And I think that that's something that resonates. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, you really are fighting the good fight. I am grateful for that. As an American, I'm grateful for you, and I'm grateful for you taking the time to speak with me today. I appreciate it greatly.
I'm happy to do it, Katie. And thank you for your strong voice. You're a very important voice in all of this.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Katie Phang here. We launched the Katie Phang News Channel in partnership with the Midas Touch Network so we could bring you the latest in legal and political news. Straight, no chaser. So if you're a fellow truth teller, hit that subscribe button and share the word about this channel so we can build a high information America together.